lecture 2. Last week we talked about introduction to macroeconomic concepts. And today we want to talk about one of the macroeconomic concepts, inflation. Right, so let's define inflation. Inflation is a sustained rise in the general price of goods and services over a period of time. A sustained rise or persistent rise in the general price of goods and services. The general price level of goods and services over a period of time. So inflation is an increase in the overall price level or overall level of prices. Inflation is not an increase in the price of a specific good or service relative to other prices. Rather, it is an increase in the overall level of prices of goods and services within a given period of time. So how do we measure inflation? Inflation is measured with a price index. In most countries, in Ghana, for instance, we use the consumer price index, which is called CPI. Now, the rate of inflation or inflation rate. Inflation rate is the percentage change in the price level from the previous period. So we compare two periods and we check the change, the percentage change, whether there has been a decrease or an increase. So this is a formula of the rate of inflation: the current price index minus the previous price index divided by the price index of the previous period, all times 100%. That is how to calculate the rate of inflation. So inflation is mostly measured with consumer price index. And how do we calculate the consumer price index? So I will introduce to you what the consumer price index is. The consumer price index is a measure of the overall price, the overall price level, and also it is the measure of the overall cost of goods and services bought by a typical consumer or the final consumer. How do we calculate the consumer price index? The consumer price index, to calculate it, we need to first of all fix a basket of goods and services. And in fixing that, we need to get which prices are most important to the typical consumer. For a typical consumer, what are the things he normally buys? Then we have to realize that all the things they buy, they have different weights. If customers buy more yam than cassava, then it means that yam will be weighted heavily in the CPI than cassava. After fixing the basket of goods and services, we then find the prices. At each point in time, we take a month or a particular date, a particular day in the month. What is the price of cassava? What is the price of yam? What is the price of tomato? What is the price of onion? We find the prices of all the goods and services. Then we compute the basket's cost, the same as basket of goods each year. So what is the cost? Cost is price times quantity, right? So that is how to get the CPI. The last thing to do is to choose a base year and compute the CPI. A base year is a benchmark against which other years are compared. So normally it is a year in which prices were stable. That is very, very essential in calculating the CPI. So now there's a formula for the CPI. The CPI is the price of the basket of goods and services in the current year divided by the price of the basket of goods and services in the base year times 100. That is the calculation of the CPI. Now, let's move on to having the CPI. How do we get to know the inflation rate? This is what we have: the CPI of the current year minus the CPI of the previous year divided by the CPI of the previous year times 100%. Gives us the inflation rate. So let's take some few examples. From 1972 to 1982, the consumer price index rose from 125.3 to 289.1. Calculate the the inflation rate or the change in CPI. By what percentage did the cost of living rise? Is the same as what is the inflation rate, or by what percentage has the CPI changed. This is how to go about it. Percentage increase in CPI, you subtract the most current from the previous, then you divide it by the previous times 100%. And you can use your calculator to give this one a try, and I believe you get the same answer. Let's take another example. The CPI rose from 114.3 in 2013 to 126.1 in 2020. By what percent did